Hello, and welcome to episode 313 of Random Encounter, RPG fans' bi-weekly podcast of mostly randomness and games that we're playing now for the most part. Obviously, I am not Jono. Santa decided to give Jono bronchitis for Christmas this year, which means he can't speak. So that means you have to settle for me, Zach Wilkerson. And it's funny, I'm going to be hosting a lot of podcasts this year because I'm now the new host of Retro Encounter. I did not think Random Encounter would be my first one. But I am not the only one here to podcast today. Also with us today is Neal.
Hello, hello.
And Audra.
Hiya.
So thanks both of you for joining me, and I will do my best to fill in for Jono today. How was your holiday season, both of you?
I would say my holidays were good and bad.
Okay.
See, the good was, attending a ballroom dance event, visiting with loved ones, and successfully baking my first ever cake. But the bad was dealing with a sinus infection for much of the holiday break, which I'm mostly over, so yay.
I feel like almost everybody I know has gotten sick around this time. Jono obviously is sick. It's just like, man, it's just going around. I was sick at like the very beginning of Christmas break, like just a little sick for a couple days, and I was like, please don't let this happen through the holidays, and it didn't. So I'm glad I dodged the bullet this time. What about you, Audra?
Well, I had a bit of the sniffles, pretty much, but that was the worst of it, and it was just a nice, relaxing holiday break.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, you
I enjoyed
finished
it.
up Final Fantasy 16 recently and enjoyed it.
Yes.
I'm not sure if that review will be up by the time this goes out, but I am glad that you also enjoyed that game. Obviously, I am on record as being a huge fan.
Yes, I did really like it.
Yeah, good. And it was great for me too. Like I played a lot of games over. I've started to play Final Fantasy IX, which is the next Retro Encounter game journal. Really enjoying that. I played through Nine Souls, which if anybody is like a Hollow Knight and or Sekiro fan, they owe it to themselves to play Nine Souls. It is brutally difficult at times, but a super fun game. And I also played through one of the games that we're going to talk about today. So today we're here to talk about two games. Neal is here to talk about Breath of Death VII, the beginning Reanimated, which I'll say more about in a second here. And Audra is here to talk about Paper Perjury, which is VN very much in the style of Ace Attorney, which I'm very sad Jono's not here to talk about because he's a huge fan. But we'll start by talking about Breath of Death VII, the beginning Reanimated. So just sort of some background before I start asking you some questions, Neal. So Breath of Death VII was originally, the beginning was originally developed by Zeboyd Games, I think it's like 14, 15 years ago. It was a while ago.
2010, yeah.
2010, yeah. And it was tossed on Xbox Live Arcade for $1. And it was like a sort of a parody and an homage to classic JRPGs, particularly Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. Like this was not the seventh Breath of Death game. It's the first one, but they kind of were playing around with the naming conventions because of how many games are in those series. And it sort of establishes Zeboyd's reputation at the time. They follow it up with games like Cthulhu Saves the World, a couple penny arcade games, Cosmic Star Heroine, which I've played and really enjoyed for what it was, another Cthulhu game, and then most recently, in a game I really want to play, is This Way Madness Lies, which is sort of a magical girl Shakespeare like mashup game. I don't know much about it beyond that, except for that, like that sounds like my jam. So I'm really interested in playing it. And interestingly, very recently, one of the two founders of Zeboyd, Bill Sternberg, I think is his name, left the company. So we're not really sure where they're going from here. But another company came in, Shadow Layer Games, and they remastered this game. They remastered Breath of Death VII and kind of took it from being like an 8-bit homage. Now it looks more like a 16-bit game. It looks a lot nicer, looks a lot better. And I actually played it myself over the last couple of days. But I am not here to talk about it so much as Neal is. So just kind of get started, Neal. What was your sort of overall impressions of Breath of Death VII? What did you know about it beforehand? Had you played the original? Kind of just give us some background.
I had never played the original. It was one of those games that I missed out on the first time around. So I came into this one completely fresh. And I gotta say, from the very beginning, the game gripped me because I loved at the very beginning when the game introduced us to our silent protagonist Dem. The game then says, we are going to incorporate our patented thoughts subtitle omatic that allows us to read the thoughts of our silent protagonist. And I thought to myself, I want a thoughts subtitle omatic in all my JRPG style RPGs with silent protagonists because, hey, if I'm being honest, I'm not a big fan of the silent protagonists, but that's a big old tangential rant for another time.
Yeah, I like a silent protagonist in certain circumstances. Like I think they always do it well in the Suikoden series. But yeah, I think that that gets to the humor of the game, like sort of right from the beginning, right, where it's sort of like poking fun at sort of like wink wink nudge nudge, like the sort of the tropes of the genre. And I think that it was pretty good. Was there anything else besides that in terms of the sense of humor that really sort of struck you as you were playing it?
What I liked was, even though it had a lot of the wink wink nudge nudge nods to a lot of the classic RPGs and various things about them, like for example the town names being portmanteaus of a game's Japanese name and its Americanized name. I thought all that was really well done. And while some of the references might, seem a little 2010s, I enjoy them because, I'm of the age where I grew up with a lot of those games. And again, I thought the humor and all was nicely done, and a lot of it landed for me. And even outside of that, even though it was a very short game that's mostly gameplay driven, when the characters did interact with each other, I thought the interactions were very amusing. Like, the characters had personality, and one thing I liked was what was called the chat feature. You go into the main menu, you click on chat, and the characters would have a little side conversation amongst themselves, similar to stuff I might have seen in the Tales series or even Phantasy Star 4. Those were fun. I would have liked more of that, but given that the game is pretty short, I finished it in maybe 5 hours. There was only so much you could put into there.
Yeah, that's true. I thought that the part that I found most amusing was we were just randomly walking through some dungeon. The first character you recruit, who looks sort of like Blue from Breath of Fire 1 and 2, she's like, "I am in love with you. I'm so glad I got to experience that." And then they get a unit. You and her get a unite attack because they have unite attacks here. And then she gets a unite attack with the other guy in your party when he's like, "Do you love me too?" And she's like, "Not a chance." And then they immediately get one, and it's like they've barely interacted throughout it, but it's still that trope. And I liked the unite attacks in this game too. It was fun. We'll talk about the battle system too, which I thought was pretty cool too as I was going through it. Which I thought one of the things that I found interesting here is there is almost no story. Sort of they have the story sort of as a setup that you get at the beginning, and then it's now you're just off to go get something. So what did you think of the storytelling in general here?
I enjoyed it because while there was the setup and a premise and all, it's like you said, it kind of went in a little bit of a stream of consciousness direction. Let's see where the adventure takes us, because even our lead protagonist Dem, it went into the trope where, if you ever played a J or J style RPG with a silent protagonist, it almost feels like the other characters are putting words in their mouth or dragging them by the neck to go places and go on this adventure. And it's like, wait, I never had a chance to say yes or no. And so I feel like that kind of played with that trope, and it made it funnier because the thought subtitle-o-matic would have them saying, "This is ridiculous." But what I also liked about that was that subversive nature, where it was about just, okay, let's see where this adventure leads us. Yeah, it might eventually lead us to saving the world or uncovering mysteries, but it didn't like put us right on the this is our quest path.
Yeah.
And so even meeting some of the characters under like odd circumstances was kind of fun.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I thought that the ending, and I don't want to spoil the ending, was a really interesting way of like sort of saving the world, and just like the way they're just like they kind of like shrug and like, okay, I guess we'll do that. I thought really funny as well.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah. The ending, subversive, short but brilliant.
Yeah, I think that there's not much storytelling here, but that was like a fun little nudge again, and I thought it was really effective. But as you point out in your review, this game, as much as it is sort of about like sort of the quirky writing and stuff like that, it is mostly about sort of dungeon town boss, and it's mostly dungeon. The dungeons in this game are long, and there is no mini map, which I will admit sometimes when I was like trying to find every treasure, I was like, oh, this is really annoying. But they do some things that kind of mitigate the annoyances that you might get because you have like random encounters, but there are some things about that. So what did you think of like the dungeon exploration, the random encounters, stuff like that?
You know what? I liked the dungeons because I felt they were meaty enough to encourage exploration and wanting to see every nook and cranny of them, but they never felt overly cumbersome or overly labyrinthine like, say, Phantasy Star 2 back in the day.
Oh man, I've never gotten more than 2 hours into that game for that very reason.
I know that the first dungeon in that game is worse than most games' final dungeons.
Yeah, it's horrendous.
Yeah, and what I also liked was that like each area has a set number of random encounters, and so once you hit that limit, you can explore as you please, unless you go into the menu and select fight to, throw yourself into a fight if you want to overgrind or something. So I liked that as well because that gave me a bit of a benchmark of how much do I need to fight to be able to take care of the boss.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll admit, one way I kind of played the system was I would, find a save point, which allowed full recovery, fight until my counter reached 0, and then go exploring as I pleased to get all the treasures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did the same thing. At least if I was like towards the end of a dungeon or the dungeon, like because usually there's a save point like right before the boss, I'd be like, I still have 7 random encounters left. I'm gonna go do those, and then I'm gonna go backtrack and try to find any treasures. And I actually I missed the first optional dungeon that had what turned out to be like a really good piece of gear for your healer character, who was actually sort of like doing the most damage for me for most of the game. And I went back, but I was able to kind of go back through the dungeon, and there was no random encounters. It was nice. There's no fast travel in this game, but the backtracking is not so bad because of the lack of random encounters once you've already cleared them out.
Yeah. And another reason why it's good to explore every nook and cranny is because there is a brand new gameplay mode in this remake called the Dragon Duck mode. Throughout the regular game, you'll find these things called Dragon Duck dolls hidden throughout. They'll be in towns, they'll be in dungeons, they'll be everywhere. You get 7 of those, and then from the start menu, you can access what's called Dragon Duck mode, which is like kind of an 8-bit Atari 2600 adventure style like mini game. So, and which I was like, oh, that was pretty cool. I'm almost getting like 2 games for 1 here.
Yeah. How was that game? I'm curious. I didn't touch it. So was it fun?
Again, I enjoyed it. again, it kind of resembled like either a very primitive like what like Atari 2600 adventure game, or like what Legend of Zelda would be like if you could only carry like one item at a time. It had the old school Breath of Death 8-bit style. Again, I didn't spend that much time with it, just enough to get a sense of what it was about, but again, I thought it was pretty fun, and it was cool. Felt like, oh, I got a bonus game with my game.
Yeah, that's always fun. Like I remember when Steins Gate Elite was released, they gave you like a little 8-bit adventure version of the game, which was like really weird and fun. And it wasn't very good, but like it was there, so I was like, that's fun. So I got to kind of experiment with it. One thing we haven't talked about, I think. Yeah, it is. One thing we haven't talked about yet, though, is the combat, which I think, to me, of all the things that I enjoyed about this game, and I like the writing and the dungeon exploration was okay, but I thought the combat and the way that like leveling works in this game and the combo system works in this game were all really cool, and I really enjoyed it. And there's like some depth there. Like I played it on normal mode, but I was like, man, if I played this on hard, like it would be like a real challenge. And I'm sort of, as I'm getting older, becoming more of a challenge hound. So what did you think of like sort of the combat and the leveling system?
I enjoyed the combat a lot. And let me tell you, even though the game has an easy mode, you will game over in easy mode if you just carelessly go through stuff or try and bulldoze through everything. You really need to strategize your moves, especially before boss battles. And one interesting mechanic I thought was how with each round of battle, the enemy's HP goes down, but they get stronger, almost like the old saying that an animal is most dangerous when it's cornered. So it's like the more you're cornering these enemies, the more vicious they're becoming. And I like how you really had to think, do I want to keep whittling away with attacks that build up my combo meter and then unleash my death blow that's made more powerful with combos, and risk making my enemies like stronger? Or do I want to just use, my most powerful attacks I have right away and just wipe them out? And so there was definitely a lot of strategy involved with the battling, even with some of the regular random encounters in dungeons. Like there were some enemies that I couldn't just hack and heal. I had to really think about, all right, how am I going to take this one out quickly before its attacks start getting too powerful for me.
Yeah, I actually thought the hardest boss fight, it wasn't even a boss fight, was like sort of like 5 random encounter enemies. It was like the end of the second secret, quote unquote, dungeon. It's not secret, it's just like out there on the map. But and you had to fight like these 4 like pretty powerful random encounter enemies. And I did it before I tried to do it because I wasn't able to do it before I got my third party member who wields like a shotgun or an SMG, and she's awesome. She's a vampire. But I tried to do it before that, and I was like, I don't think this is possible. Like, they just kept like this, like totally destroying me. But even once I got her, like it's still like thinking about like, okay, I need to take out this enemy first, and I needed to take about like it was refreshing to really have to think about the system. And it was like unique enough that it was cool, but it wasn't so unique that it was hard to get a grip on. And thinking about like keeping your combos going or whatever, I thought was really cool too.
100% agreed. And yes, the vampire character is awesome. Gotta love her. And that's another thing, is that even though the new party members would come to you with like much lower levels, what I loved was after maybe a battle or two, they caught up really quick.
Yeah, the experience scaling in this game is really good too, especially given its length. It's really impressive.
Yeah, and I'm just like, wow, why don't more RPGs do that, because there are even some modern games where characters come to us at low levels and you gotta grind to catch them up.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things. Audra and I are both big Suikoden fans, and one of the reasons that I like it so much is that it's always so easy to catch your characters up with the leveling. But speaking of the leveling, there's another really cool mechanic when you level up. Basically, you choose between two different stat boosts. So most of them aren't that important. So maybe you're choosing between like adding 20 to your will and 20 to your vigor, or you're adding 20 to your attack and 20 to your defense or something. But occasionally, like really important ones come up. Like there's one around like level 20 for most characters where you add a hit to your regular attack, which also builds the combo meter faster. And you mentioned this in your review, Neal. I accidentally selected the wrong one because the controls in this game sometimes are just weird, and like the input delays, or sometimes eating an input too fast. And it's not normally that big a deal, but when I chose the wrong level up and I didn't get an extra hit on one of my characters, I was furious. So what was your experience with the leveling up system?
Again, I love that leveling up gave me those options. And not just the big level 21 that you were talking about, but even throughout, there were some where you had to choose, okay, do you want a fire attack that hits one enemy really hard, or hits all of them like kind of light, and I had to choose between, do I want big boss damage, or do I want sweep damage for random encounters? So I thought that was definitely cool. It gives, like, there's options for how you're gonna build your character, and yeah, that was definitely pretty cool. But with the controls, yeah, I felt like the controls, especially when I was navigating the menus, were pretty slippery. So yeah, there were times when I would click through and I would accidentally select a level up option. I'm like, wait, I didn't get a chance to see what it was in the other one.
Oh.
Yeah, I had the exact same problem, and it was very frustrating when that happened. But I think that there, so obviously that this is an updated version of an 8-bit game that's made to look like a 16-bit game, and I think there are a lot of things they do that probably are good, just sort of depending on what you're looking for. In the original 8-bit one, I've looked at screenshots, and like there's just like a black Dragon Quest 1 through 4 background, basically. Whereas here, you sort of see the environment, sort of like a later Dragon Quest game, or some of the remakes. You would see it there. But other than that, other than the look, and then other than the music, which I'll ask you about that now, Neal. What did you think of the music in this game?
The music is so good. I mean, it's HyperDuck SoundWorks. I mean, have they ever put out anything bad? I mean,
no, I don't think so.
Nope.
Exactly. I mean, I watched videos of Let's Play videos of the original Breath of Death VII, just so I could experience what the original soundtrack was like. And while the original chiptune music of that game was good, it's not HyperDuck SoundWorks. And I feel like, and maybe because I'm like a passionate music guy, I think the HyperDuck SoundWorks soundtrack alone is enough to justify the price of the remake.
I mean, it's only like $3.50 on sale, so yeah, it's definitely worth it.
All that being said, though, it would have been nice to have the option to be able to play the game with the original music, especially, if fans of the previous game who'd played it before could kind of, be able to compare and contrast. But again, there's probably all kinds of like copyright and whatever issues that prevented that from happening. But hey, we got HyperDuck SoundWorks on the remake. Win.
Yeah, Yeah, I agree. I think it sounds great. And I think it looks great too. But there were a couple things, like some quality of life things that I kind of wish that I wish they had added. Was there any that you were sort of looking for that you didn't get, Neal?
I wish the game had an autosave feature, because one, autosave is pretty much the norm these days, and two, with the dungeons being so lengthy, there were times I would go through a length of dungeon, get party wiped by a random encounter, and I'm like, and would have to go back to an early manual save. Whereas if there was an autosave, I wouldn't have had to do that. So the lack of an autosave is my biggest complaint with the Breath of Death VII remake.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable one. And, I said earlier that I would like a mini map, and I understand why there are things like no mini map and there's no autosave and there's no fast travel, because like it's trying to replicate to some degree some of those classics. And I actually think to some degree that would have made more sense in the original, because like I'm playing an 8-bit game and those things wouldn't have probably been there. But a lot of SNES games had things like mini maps or things like fast travel. They probably didn't have autosaving, but I agree. Autosaving would be a nice feature for them to add in. So one last question for you, Neal. So kind of taking Breath of Death VII Reanimated into its totality, what do you think, what kind of RPG fan do you think should get their hands on this game?
You know what? I think the fan that would get the most out of it would be, maybe an older RPG fan who maybe grew up with some of the who grew up with like the 8 and 16, even 32-bit games, of the NES, Genesis, Super NES, PlayStation era, because a lot of the humor and a lot of the references will be stuff that they remember and they grew up with. Plus, folks who came of age with gaming back then are probably in their 30s and 40s now with very busy schedules. You got families and kids and work and life, and you might still want that fulfilling RPG experience. And with something like Breath of Death 7, you can get that fulfilling, soup to nuts RPG experience in like a 5-hour package. So yeah, I feel like Breath of Death 7, it definitely targets a particular niche in terms of like age bracket, but that niche I think will absolutely love it.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think one of the sort of fundamental sort of driving principles of Zeboyd has always been like, we're going to respect your time. And sometimes I think that it works here. I think it mostly works. I will admit that like I really enjoyed this game, but like, and I can see how in 2010 it would have been like really subversive and really cool. But to me, I'm like, this humor, while funny, was used better in Undertale. But my point is this, like, I think that here, like, it's such a compact package. I think I finished it in like 4 hours. Even if not every joke landed for me, like, it was no big deal because we were on to the next joke, on to the next thing. And I'm 39 years old, so I definitely am right in the dead center of that target audience. And so I enjoyed it for that reason. So thank you, Neal, for chatting about it. And it was a good excuse for me to also give it a shot. It's only my second Zeboyd joint. I played Cosmic Star Heroine. That's definitely a more fully featured RPG, but it has its own issues with storytelling and things like that. So anyway, we're going to kind of shift gears here, and we're going to talk about a series that I'm sad Jono doesn't get to, or on a game that I'm sad Jono doesn't get to talk about because I know he's such a huge fan of the Ace Attorney series. But pretty recently on the site, Audra, you just published a review for Paper Perjury, which is very much a VN in the style of Ace Attorney. And it's weird. I coached mock trial, which is sort of like a simulated like court thing for like, I don't know. I coached it for like 17 years. I did it for like 7 or 8 years when I was in high school and in college. So I'm like very familiar with court related things. But I've still somehow never touched Ace Attorney. So
Oh,
I think I should.
well, they're good. They
but
are
part
good.
of me worries that I would be annoyed that like it gets like the court system wrong, but it's different in Japan, right? So like I don't know, it probably wouldn't bother me that much. But Ace Attorney in general, just is a long running series with where you play like a slightly out of his depth defense attorney against a range of just like totally ridiculous witnesses. It's got like sort of a similar tone in some ways to like a Dragon. In particular, they kind of lean into that in Judgment and Lost Judgment, which are games that I have played. And Paper Perjury is a new game that sort of comes out in hopes of giving us like sort of that familiar Ace Attorney hit, so to speak. It's from a group called Paper Games. It has handcrafted pixel art animations, this jazzy soundtrack, and themes that are pretty mature, centering around ideas of gentrification and a growing city. So what do you think, Audra, sort of makes it stand out as an homage to Ace Attorney, and how does it sort of bring its own unique twist to the formula?
I think the societal commentaries they make are actually really compelling and not quite something that usually you get in Ace Attorney. You kind of just get more who did the murder case and why, whereas here it's more they are talking about commentary like gentrification and just kind of maybe the rich abusing their power and stuff over the poor and stealing money from orphans, which is always fun and wrong and horrible, but like amusing when they do it in a case and you're like, oh, that's the comment. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. That sort of reminds me of like a Dragon game where it like manages to have like sort of this absurd tone, but it deals with important issues. And I'm totally a sucker for that when they pull it off. So that makes it sound like my jam already. So kind of taking a step back, sort of what's like the general overall plot for this game, Audra?
Oh, you play as Justina Smith, who's a recently hired paper clerk for the Audra City Police Department. And she ends up getting roped into this robbery case because she finds like a discrepancy in the tape testimony of a witness. And so they drag her in to like prove why it's a discrepancy and everything. And she ends up helping to solve the case. And so then from there on, the veteran detective who is in charge of a lot of those cases decides he's going to bring her along with him to help him out in all the places. So it's almost like she's playing the kind of like the assistant character, but she's the one kind of figuring out all of the clues and solving the cases at the end of the day. It's an interesting case thing. She doesn't quite know about the court politics and stuff. So it's like she has to have the police help her out on that end, but she's the one solving most of the cases. And a lot of them end up kind of hitting closer to home. Like one of them involves her father, and she didn't realize it was going to happen that way.
Okay. I think that you said, correct me if I'm wrong, in your review that there's like sort of 5 different cases that you're solving here. Is that right?
Yes.
How does like the pacing work with those 5? And how does it all sort of work together?
The first case is kind of more of like a tutorial to get you into the game play and everything. So it's more just you're at the police station and you're just questioning a witness for most of it. And then it really goes fast forward from that case into the next one, which has you kind of going back and researching a little bit about the previous case as well to figure out, because it lines up with what happened. So it's like the last 4 cases are more the ones where you actually go to the crime scenes and you talk to people outside of the police station and you gather the evidence, and then you go back to the police station for like the interrogations and the final confrontations. Okay.
And do you think that sort of that rhythm works with the game, or do you feel like some moments worked better than others and some dragged more than others because of that?
I didn't think it dragged. I think it works pretty well. I do feel like the first case goes really fast comparatively.
Okay.
And then everything else kind of, because they're building on it and doing other things, the cases tend to be longer. I do feel like there are certain points where they're not quite as clear as they maybe could have been about what you need to present to someone to advance the plot.
Yeah.
And so you can get stuck and I believe it's the last case, I was stuck for about an hour trying to figure out, and it's a shorter game. It's like only like 5 or 6 hours long, but I was stuck there for an hour, hour trying to figure out what they wanted me to do to advance.
Well, that's frustrating. Yeah. I feel like in games like that, where like where they have like a certain sequence they want you to go through, or you're presenting evidence. they usually need to kind of give you a little bit more to keep the momentum going. Give you maybe some hints. Were there no hints in terms of it, or just let's try again?
There weren't really any hints. I'd gathered all the evidence, and I was ready to advance, but then I didn't know who I was supposed to talk to in order to get like this one discrepancy they needed me to get.
Okay. So, I haven't played Ace Attorney games. I have played a number of VNs, and I know that VNs in general are driven by the characters, right?
Yes.
So you showered a lot of praise on Justina, and you also talked about like sort of the relationship between Justina and Sophie. What were some of your thoughts on that relationship, on the characters in general?
I love Justina. She's a great main character. She has like the perfect eye roll whenever someone does something really dumb in the game, which is a great reaction. It's pixel sprite expression.
I'm a sucker for a good pixel art expression.
And she loves coffee, which is also great. And
very important.
Yes. And I kind of like that they were doing that. She's kind of a young woman who's like, she's kind of going against her parents for wanting to become a paper clerk because they're all artists and they wanted her to follow in their footsteps. And she doesn't really know what she wants to do, but she was like, I might as well apply for this job. And then she ends up being pretty good at the police work, even though she has no desire for the police work at first. And it just it's a very good finding yourself story with her. And I like the Sophie character, just the way their dynamic evolves from just being partners at first to just becoming like really good friends. And then kind of the hinting that there's maybe something more under it was very nicely done, I thought. Very cute and sweet.
Okay. I mean, like just subtle enough that it's not like sort of going over the top, but like enough that like if you're paying attention, you're kind of getting a feel for it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I loved a lot of the other characters too. I mean, like the Ferris Eubank, the defense attorney, she's a great character because at first you thought she was going to be like this over the top villain person, and they gave her so much depth and like actual heart and understanding as to why she would even be fighting against them in a lot of the cases. That's more than you'd think. It wasn't just because she was like out for profits and stuff, and like she honestly believed in the people and stuff and everything. And you actually play as her in some of the cases, which I thought was a really neat twist.
Yeah, mm-hmm. That is a cool. Yeah. So like I think because you have interrogation sequences in this game, right?
Yes.
And you have some back and forth during those interrogations with Ferris. Sort of what exactly is, like, how effective do you think they were? What exactly is that dynamic like in this game?
It's pretty good. The back and forth is it's quite fast, and it's a lot of, you can question people as many times as you want, but eventually they'll kind of be like, why are you just beating a dead horse at this point and stuff. And so it's like, it keeps you on the right track, but it doesn't I thought it was nice that they did not penalize you. In Ace Attorney, they sometimes would be like, if you press too much on certain issues, they were going to take away like your health or stamina and stuff. Or if you present the wrong evidence, we'll give you a penalty and you'll get a game over if you get enough of those. And they don't do that in this game, which I thought it was a nicer, more forgiving cycle so that you're not getting stressed out by the interrogation phase.
Yeah. So like that hour long one, you didn't have to actually lose health during it. You just had to kind of try it again, essentially. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I could see that being nice. I think it would be really frustrating to lose health when you get things slightly wrong, because I sometimes don't pay attention to details as well as I should.
Yeah.
Can you kind of talk about the look of the game? I know we've talked a little bit about the character sprites and their animations, but like, how does that work with the storytelling experience? How effective did you think it was? What did you think of the backgrounds?
I did think the backgrounds were a bit simple, but I thought in a way that helped the character models and the pixel sprites for the characters stand out more, which I love that the characters themselves all had very different poses and expressions fitting their personalities. And they had like these little quirks that they'd tie into their animations, which I really liked, like the eye roll. And Sophie would, because she has a motorcycle, she'd like spin her helmet around in her hand. And she'd drop it if she got, and she'd drop it if she got like surprised by something. So it was like nice. little touches like that. And like Ferris would drink tea from a flask, from a hip flask, and then spit it out if she.
Okay, you're really selling me on this. I like all these little pixel art things. Like I love just humor like that. It's totally my thing. It's like really cute and fun. But I think from my understanding, at least, like sort of the music and sound design is really important in the Ace Attorney games. How important is how would you compare the music and sound design, and how important is the sound design in this game?
The sound effects are really good. They definitely fit for especially the characters, the animated portions. They have like when someone has a breakdown and stuff and is beating something on a chair or a table, you like the sound effect for it is perfect, on point. And it's a very limited soundtrack. I think there's about 3 or 4 songs in the whole thing, but the songs that they do, especially for like we're getting intense at this point, and I think I found the clue and stuff that'll solve the case. They're really well done and catchy.
Okay. Yeah, that's very Ace Attorney, right? Like sort of like those big swelling moments where it kind of keeps things moving.
Like when you have your gotcha moment.
Yeah. I love a gotcha moment. Like in a good legal thriller, always love a good gotcha moment.
Yeah.
It never happens in real life, but I like it. So I want to kind of back up for a second here and kind of talk about, like, do some comparisons, but also talk about sort of ways that you might improve some of the stuff. So we've talked a couple times about getting stuck for an hour on that evidence presentation thing, and that's the sort of thing that totally infuriates me when I'm playing a game. Do you think there's anything they could have done that would have maybe made that work better, so it wouldn't have been as like that getting stuck on an hour on that sort of thing?
Well, they usually have like a little checklist called the leads in their menu option that would tell you like the objectives for the case at that time, and what it was pretty clear on, you need to talk to this person again, or you need to, and I just feel like sometimes they missed mentioning, oh, by the way, you might want to, now that you have this evidence, you might want to go back to this person, or they aren't clear on that as they could have been.
Do you think that was purposeful to sort of make you think for yourself on that? Or like, do you think that it was just something they missed because they were trying to do it elsewhere and they didn't do it here? I'm just kind of curious about that.
I think because it only happens on some rare occasions that it was probably just more of a missed opportunity.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That'd be frustrating.
Because at that point, I'd actually done everything that they said on the leads that I needed to advance the story. And then I was like, what am I doing wrong?
Oh, okay. So it actually like sort of gives you the indication that you've done everything you're supposed to do. Okay.
And then you had like one extra thing that they were just not. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess sort of looking at it on the whole, like, how well do you think they balanced like making an homage to Ace Attorney while also sort of creating their own thing?
I think they did a pretty good job. It's a good standalone story on its own, but it like has that same kind of heart and humor that Ace Attorney does, but it's not like just a kind of a blatant soulless ripoff because it's doing its own thing. I feel like.
Yeah, it's such a sort of a hard balance to strike, right? Because we see it so often. Like I think about some of the Tokyo RPG Factory games, like I Am Setsuna, which, whether you liked it or not, definitely is very much like just, hey, here's this original game. We're just going to slightly tweak some things, and then here you go. And it doesn't work. Whereas others, thinking of like turn-based RPGs, like I don't know, Octopath Traveler or Chained Echoes, I think do it effectively. So it's such a tough balance. So I guess overall, do you think it delivers on its promise as a satisfying Ace Attorney-like experience with heart?
Yes, I would say so. I think I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the plot. I liked the mystery dynamic, and that it didn't annoy me usually in terms of gameplay. But so it was more like a relaxing, I don't want to say like cozy, but it had a more relaxed feel to it for playing. Okay.
So do you think, as a person who's never played an Ace Attorney game, sort of to kind of flip it, do you think that I would have the same enjoyment from it, or do you think that I would not enjoy it as much because of like I'm missing like the references and the callbacks and stuff?
I think you'd actually enjoy it pretty well, same as an Ace Attorney game, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I wouldn't
give
think
it a shot,
it would
especially with the short length.
Yeah. It is a shorter game than you most Ace Attorney titles tend to be, so that's in its favor, I think.
Yeah, we were talking about 2 bite-sized games, right? Like, Breath of Death 7, 4 or 5 hours, this 5 or 6 hours. That's like you could knock these both out in a day if you were crazy.
Yeah.
Which is the sort of crazy thing that I might do. Okay, well, that sounds great. I think that you did a great job of talking about it in your review and sort of drawing those comparisons, but also talking about how it's its own thing. So thank you for chatting about it and sort of putting this game on my radar, a game that I wouldn't really so much have been on my radar as not an Ace Attorney person.
Yeah.
So as you know, it's typical for us to sort of wrap up Random Encounter with a discussion question. And I think that the discussion question definitely should be like, can we all just talk about what our real thoughts on John O'Logan are?
Oh,
I'm kidding. For the record, that was Jono's suggestion. It's in his show notes. And I was like, I like that so much, I'm going to use it. But he also gave me a real discussion question that it's kind of related to both of these games to some degree. And it's sort of along the lines of what we were talking about earlier, is that we've gotten a lot of indie games like Breath of Death VII. We've gotten a lot of games that are being remade lately. So even something like Breath of Death 7, which is this bite-sized experience, 15 years later, we were putting out another one. I don't know how many different The Last of Us there are at this point, but it's got to be at least 3. They already remade The Last of Us Part 2. I don't even know how that's possible. Like, I played that game like 2 years ago, and I was like, this doesn't need to be remade. So I guess my question is, we've had a ton of remakes and reimaginings in 2024. We have a ton more coming up in 2025. Some I'm very excited about. Suikin and Leonor. Some I'm very excited about. But my question is, do you think that like sort of this trend towards remakes and remasters, do you think it's like sort of stifling innovation, or do you think that there's room for new and old stuff? Do you think that we've sort of leaned too far into remakes and remasters at this point? Or do you think that like the more the merrier?
That's interesting to think about, because most of the games I played in 2024 were like remakes or remasters. Like, for example, when I played the remake of Vey, it was the most unexpected like re-release.
It's like a game that I am aware of and I never wanted to play, and I still don't want to, but like, really? The Vey?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sentiment when I talked about it in a prior episode of Random was, excuse me, it's like, wow, that's nice, but really? So that was unexpected. And then on the other hand, one remaster that flew under the radar was Fate Stay Night Remastered. Like, I didn't even know a remaster of that one existed until, like, I was approached by a PR rep about it, and I'm like, hey, cool. I mean, this is a game that started an entire IP that has like an extremely fervent following. We've gotten a smattering of releases here and there, but finally we get the game that started it all. So in that sense, I'm glad that remaster existed, because even though some of the storytelling aspects of it were dated, it's like, okay, finally we're getting a game outside of Japan that, has a big following. And then we have another case of the upcoming Fate Extra record, because I played Fate Extra on a PSP back in the day, and my review of it was basically visual novel aspects were great, RPG aspects were awful. Yet this remake looks like it's retooling the RPG aspects to make it far more playable. So I'm like, okay, I'm interested now, because this is something that had potential, and I want to see if they can improve on it. So it's with the idea of the remakes, remasters, re-releases, I feel like it could go either way. There's some where it's like, really? Thanks, but okay. There are others that are like, all right, finally, we're getting to see this game for real that's been kept from us for so long. And then there's also they're taking a game and fixing what was broken about it. Okay, I'm interested now. So yeah, again, I can't say the remakes, remasters are a good or bad thing. It's on a case-by-case basis, really.
I think that's pretty accurate. It's kind of more you need a balance between remakes and remasters and new content, because otherwise, I mean, yeah, you are doing, sometimes there's games that are like, that came out like a year ago on the same console and you're remastering it already.
Right.
So, but then other games, you have ones that either hadn't been localized before, so now you get a chance for other people to play it, more people too, or older games that finally get the chance for other people to try them out too. So it's kind of and then you have like the FF7 remake trilogy, which is just its own thing that's kind of like separate and yet and unique.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question, and I think that the reality is, like, if you think about, like, if you ever go look at, like, our social media, which don't, but if you ever look at it, like, the things that get the most play and traction for our audience is almost always retro stuff. And you think about, like, how many, as you were talking about earlier, Neal, how many of us sort of grew up during an era, and so many people just want to go back and experience that nostalgia again. And I think that to some degree, like, I'm guessing that a lot of those remakes and remasters are relatively profitable without a whole lot of investment. And that allows them, hopefully, unless you're Konami and the only thing you do is remake games, is hopefully like sort of invest that money into new IPs to push things more, especially with how much more expensive game development is nowadays, which how much longer it takes nowadays. And so I think that there is space for both. There are times where I'm like, okay, like again, this is not our coverage, but I think about The Last of Us. I'm like, seriously, Naughty Dog, like you're just trying to like squeeze blood from a turnip at this point. Like it's insane how much they do. But for the most part, I think that it works well, and I think that you can do it really well. I think about like a Dragon Quest III remake. I think about like Romancing Saga 2, which has gotten great reviews in terms of the way it's updating a challenging game. We're talking about Saga. I'm sorry, Jono. Updating a challenging game, but also making it accessible, but also in some ways sort of maintaining what it was to begin with. And so I think that it's a balancing act, as you guys both said, and I think that there's room and space for both. And I think that you can bring creativity to a remake and a remaster. You don't always have to, but you can. There's still artfulness to it if it's done well. And so I think there's certainly still space for it.
Yes. Excellently said.
So thank you both so much for chatting about our thoughts on remasters and on Breath of Death VII and Paper Perjury, two games that, sort of, live in the shadow of other games, but in very different ways. I had a great time chatting with both of you, and thank you guys for joining me. It was fun.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. It was really fun.
So let's kind of go into housekeeping now. I'm really bad at transitions. I'm like, let's do this other thing. I don't know. I've gotten docked on it on like teacher evaluations before too. I'm like, I don't know. Why do I need like a fun transition? We're doing something different now. Now the different thing we're doing is housekeeping. So if you are looking for ways to support us at RPG Fan, we have a store. We have a shop. You can find it at rpgfan.com/shop. We have two things on there. One is a collaboration with Hyperplay RPG, where you can buy the RPG Fan Review Card Collection, which is a book of almost 300 views, maybe over 300 views on cards. It looks very much like sort of an old gaming magazine. It's very cool. All three of us have reviews that are featured in that collection. And we also have a shop where you can purchase different sort of mugs, T-shirts, things like that. RPG Fan memorabilia. It goes on sale a lot, so always keep an eye on those things. I've got mug, T-shirt. I was an RPG fan before I was an RPG fan. I don't know.
So was I.
Me too.
So if you want to check out our past episodes of Random, you can always do so. We've got 312 previous episodes, a lot of them hosted by Jono, but all the way back to Rob Steinman. In our last episode, we chatted about the games we were most looking forward to in 2025. It was a good time. I was on that episode. And there's a lot of games coming out next year that I'm very excited about. Some of them are remasters. And over at Retro Encounter, Encounter. I guess I'm qualified to speak on this now. I guess as of the time of this, when this releases, I will officially have taken over as showrunner of Retro Encounter. There will be some changes to the format, but in general, it's still going to be Retro Encounter as you've known it, except for with me instead of the wonderful host that is Mike Solosi. But the one thing I could tell you is that coming up in January, we're going bi-weekly. So we'll be playing Final Fantasy IX. The first episode will release on January 16th. The second one will release on January 30th. I'm about the first disc of Final Fantasy IX. I haven't played it in 25 years, and I like it a lot better than I did 25 years ago, and I liked it just fine back then. So it's been fun. The other podcast we have is Rhythm Encounter, which posts the other Monday of every 2 Mondays with Random Encounter. It's RPG Fans Music Podcast. They just had their 150th episode a few weeks ago, and it was a quiz show episode that was inspired sort of by Solosi's retro quiz shows, and it was just a delight. Pat and Mike did a phenomenal job putting it together. Hillary and Gio both did an amazing job on it. I had a competition with my partner on it, and on the very last question, I beat her. It was awesome, especially because she knows way more about RPG music than I do. She was real mad about it. Alana does not like losing. But coming up next, actually last week, we had an interview with Brandon Boone, which is a composer of Slay the Princess, which has one of the best soundtracks I've heard in a long time. I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, but I'm sure Pat does an amazing job with the interview, and I really love the soundtrack for Slay the Princess. Slay the Princess, if you two haven't played Slay the Princess yet, you two would love it.
I want to.
Both of you.
Definitely.
It's fabulous. So if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can fire us off a message, podcast@rpgfan.com. We'd love to hear from you with any ideas for future episodes, discussion questions, because we love those. Those are hard to come up with, or anything else you'd like to share. If you'd like to send me an email personally, you can email me, zachw@rpgfan.com. You can also find me on Discord as Zach W. And I guess you could also email retro@rpgfan.com, since I am now checking that. But Neal, how can people get in touch with you?
Via email, nealch@rpgfan.com. That's NEALCH. And industry folks can get in touch with me through PR@rpgfan.com. And I'm also on RPG Fans Discord at NealCHRPGFan.
Awesome. And what about you, Audra?
You can reach me at email at audrab@rpgfan.com.
Excellent. Both of you not on social media. Very, very smart. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends. Help us get the word out there. You can rate us on iTunes, any other podcast player of your choosing. And again, I want to thank both of you for spending part of your holiday break with me over the last hour. It's been a blast. And listeners, thank you for listening. And whatever you're playing, have fun.